Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinema Flow podcast. I'm your host, Zach Abdelbaki, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Ms. Claire Offenberger. Claire is a writer-director who recently graduated from Chapman University. Her short film, San Clemente Syndrome, recently screened at the Catalina Film Festival, where it won an award for the film's lead actress. Claire's newest short film, My Face Is Not My Own, will be making the rounds at film festivals very soon. I've had the pleasure of seeing both of these films, and I can tell you that they are remarkable, which is why I'm very excited to learn more about them from our guest today. Welcome to the show, Claire. Thank you for making the time to do this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, thank you. On this show, I always like to start at the beginning, so why don't you tell everybody where you're from and how you first got into filmmaking?
So, yeah, I like to say I was born in the stray piece of the Bible Belt, also known as South Orange County. I was born in Newport Beach and grew up in Mission Viejo. And I always felt a bit on the fringes of South Orange County, which is very much so in the shadow of a lot of mega churches. My dad is Jewish and my mom is Catholic, and that made me kind of different from a lot of the people in my neighborhood and in schools. I was fortunate enough to go to an arts high school starting, it was grade 7 through 12, middle school and high school in Santa Ana. And that completely opened up my world. That allowed me to be more expressive and be my authentic self and pursue initially acting, and then I ended up going into the film conservatory.
You said an arts high school in Santa Ana. Was that OSHA?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's cool. And while you were there, is it true you went to make documentaries and stuff? I read that on your IMDb bio.
So yes, when I transferred into the film conservatory at the Orange County School of the Arts, I was mostly making narrative work, narrative short films, but outside of school, uh, I ended up becoming really close friends with my parents' family friend who was a refugee from the Vietnam War. And he kind of became a surrogate chosen godfather for me, so to speak. That's how I kind of introduce him now. He was definitely like a very positive force in my life while my parents were separating. And he knew I was having a hard time. And he saw that I was really passionate about film. And so he invited me to come travel with his nonprofit that provides aid to impoverished individuals in primarily Vietnam, where he's from. And in exchange, I made short documentaries, which are still continuing to be screened at fundraising events and on their website. So that experience of going abroad at a relatively young age, and experiencing a culture that is so vastly different from my own, even though, funnily enough, in Orange County, it's the largest diaspora of Vietnamese people outside of Vietnam. I didn't really grow up around that so much. I think having the chance to be completely taken out of my own context and my own understanding of myself in the world, and being placed in this completely new environment, it made me realize that like I'm not in control of any of this. I'm just this kind of observer of the world, and everyone's just doing their best. And that really informed my narrative work as well. I tend to like to be very observant of my characters rather than imposing a certain opinion of them on my audience.
Yeah, I think that definitely comes across in your movies, at least the ones that I've seen from you. But question, when you were at OSHA, was Chapman the main school you wanted to go to? Because for those who don't know, Chapman and OSHA are literally like 5 minutes away from each other.
I actually really was very resistant to going to Chapman.
Oh,
I
interesting.
didn't even apply when I was in high school. I wanted to get out of Orange County. I wanted to explore the world a little bit more, especially since I had a taste of traveling. I just knew I needed some sense of adventure. And for me at that time, going to Chapman did not sound like an adventure. It felt like more of what was familiar, because in many ways OSHA is kind of a pipeline to Chapman. So actually after I graduated high school, it was a challenging time because I got into USC for film production, but I did not go because of the price tag. And in hindsight, I'm really, really glad that I did not go. I'm really happy with the path that unfolded for me. I took a gap year and worked as an assistant to an actress and as first team PA as well, on two Fox films. One was called The Darkest Minds, and the other is The Hate You Give. And those experiences were extremely demanding and challenging and gave me a much clearer sense of what actually goes into making a film. Because while I did have a pretty robust film education for my age, attending an arts high school with a film program, had no idea the level of politics and the stakes that are real and present for making a studio film. So I'm really glad I had that opportunity. After that, I moved with a friend that I made on the set of The Hate You Give to downtown LA and was commuting to Santa Monica College while working at a film sales company. And it was while I was at Santa Monica College that I really started to seriously consider Chapman. And I think the reason I started to seriously consider Chapman was because I realized that my friends who did go to USC were actually not making very many films. And I heard that Chapman kids were making a lot of films. So that's what made it a lot clearer for me personally.
Yeah, I agree about the USC thing because I really wanted to go there for a long time as a teenager. And then watched some YouTube videos where people were talking about their experience there. And that's literally all I heard is that they don't even let you take a film class in your first semester. And they're I mean, again, this is all anecdotal, so don't take my word for it, people listening. But like, I also heard that the majors are pretty restrictive on what classes you could take. And I was a screenwriting major at Chapman, and they still let me take all the directing classes I wanted to take. They let me make an IP. They were very lenient. Now, maybe later, if they become as big as USC and as popular as USC, that'll change. But for now, they're really good. Um, so when you were at Chapman, you made your AP film San Clemente Syndrome, which recently screened at a film festival, and I assume it'll be available to the public sometime in the near future. Correct me if I'm wrong, but could you tell everyone what the movie's about?
Yes, so San Clemente Syndrome was, as you said, my advanced production film or AP film, which was essentially our junior thesis, to prepare for senior thesis. So San Clemente Syndrome is about a young woman who goes to visit her father in a distant beach town, and they have a very strained relationship, but she's very hungry to connect with him. It's not directly expressed, but it's implied that there's perhaps some mental illness or substance abuse involved in the father's life. Something's up. Anyway, so he doesn't show up when she finally arrives in this beach town. And rather than turn around and make the drive back to college, she decides to stay and picks up with this older surfer guy who she initially is drawn to, perhaps because he's this surrogate father figure, but then he, without even being prompted, takes on that role in this almost suffocating way. And ultimately, she has to decide to set off on her own.
I noticed in the credits of the movie that it's based on a short story by Sarah Bloom. What was it about her story that made you want to adapt it?
It's a very personal story for Sarah, and I really resonated with how complex the protagonist is, and how all the characters are ultimately very gray and just trying to make sense of the world. I think that films that seem to prescribe a worldview or a certain value judgment on who is a good person and who is a bad person feel unnatural to me. I'm much more interested in telling stories that allow people to, you know, embrace the full spectrum of experience of being a human, which includes, you know, being quote both good and bad. Because I think, you know, ultimately there are I don't want to get too philosophical.
Well, one of the things I love about San Clemente is the quiet moments we get to experience between the characters. I like that both of their histories aren't spelled out super clearly for the audience. You give us this implied history for the main characters, and then it's up to the audience to fill in the blanks. Was that always
Mhm.
the plan with writing the script, or were there earlier drafts that had more dialogue with more exposition?
That's a good question. Actually, so the way we went about writing it, if I'm remembering correctly, was Sarah and I each wrote a draft of the script separately, and then we came together and then kind of like merged what we liked about each. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, like my personal taste, as I've just, you know, emphasized, is to be very stripped back and minimal and observant or observational of the characters and their world. So I think at times we had to strike a balance between, you know, we had to find a way to offer enough details so that it was clear what was going on, but still allowing room for the audience to, you know, kind of engage with the film in this more imaginative way where they can fill in the blanks. Like I'm very interested in mindfulness. I've been meditating almost every single day for the last 2 years, and it's completely changed my life, and not just in the sense that it's, you know, a great way to deal with stress and you know, all the, you know, kind of headlines that people like to slap on to meditation. But like beyond that, it's really shifted my perspective as an artist and the way I approach directing, because I've realized that our thoughts are so beyond our control most of the time. Like when you really sit and just watch the thoughts arise, you recognize that you're not actively choosing to think them a lot of the time. So, I'm going to try and keep this concise. So in terms of how that relates to my style as a director, I realize that, you know, when you're watching a movie, sometimes you'll find that you're thinking about something that is seemingly completely unrelated to the film, especially if it's a boring movie. But sometimes you're on a different train of thought because something about the film reminded you of something in your life and like really resonated. And so with San Clemente syndrome, I wanted to provide just enough information that you're allowed to understand what's going on like in the plot and in the essential reality of the film, but it it's suggestive enough that like the audience can kind of project onto the characters and feel immersed in the world in a way that like merges with their own consciousness.
It's interesting that you talk about projecting onto the characters when you watch a movie, because I've had conversations with people where I tell them why I related to a movie and I liked it, and they're
Mhm.
like, well, that's just you bringing your own personal thing and projecting it onto the movie. And then I said, isn't that kind of what directing is? It's like you take the script and you find a way that you relate to it in your life, and then you
Mhm.
explain it into the actors, and then they project their own shit from their own life, and then they give the performance, and it feels like there's this implied history in their faces that you can see that what they're saying in the movie is informed by something that happened in the character's past and in their backstory.
I think what you said about directing being like a form of projecting onto characters and infusing them with your own perspective and experience is spot on. Like, I think that is ultimately what directing is. You can't help but bring your personal experience to your art. Like, what else do you have? I think if you don't bring, your identity or what you think is your identity to your creative endeavors, especially as a filmmaker, then you're creating like a PSA, like you're creating something devoid of soul. Although I've made a few PSAs where, there's story and there's room for that, but you understand what I'm meaning. Directing is ultimately a study of how humans work and function in the world, I think. And in my, short life and what I've learned about how people work, it seems to me that we kind of take all of our experiences or the ones that stand out the most and put them together in our mind and say that this is who I am. Based on these experiences, this is how I define myself. But, you know, ultimately, like, we are not these experiences. They don't exist anymore. They're memories. But because of how we acted in, particular situations, or how we remember that we acted in particular situations, we have this story about who we are. And I think as a director, my job is to try and unpack what a particular character's story is about themselves. And because like we all like navigate the world as though we're the protagonist of our own movie, like that's how most people operate, at least in the Western world, I feel. And I think what really interests me as a filmmaker is finding a way to understand what a character's story about themselves is, but not impose that on the audience necessarily. Like the actor knows what their character's story is, but only give clues to the audience so that they can infuse who they think they are with the characters. Because when you're inviting the audience to engage with the characters and project onto them, the characters are a lot more interesting because then you're not just thinking about this separate person from you, you're also thinking about yourself and
That's
like reflecting on who you are.
Yeah, I think that just makes for an overall richer movie experience for the audience. And I think that your actors really accomplished what you were going for, especially Sophie Saviz. I thought that she was particularly great. Can you talk about how you found her and what was it like working with her?
Yeah, so Sophie's a gem. She's very talented. She actually just won an award for her performance in San Clemente Syndrome at the Catalina Film Festival. So how did I find her? So I worked with our classmate or former classmate Max Halpin as our casting director on San Clemente Syndrome. And Max was holding auditions for a different short film at the time. And Sophie had submitted for a role in that short film. And I was having a hard time finding someone that I liked from the pool that we had at that point. And Max suggested that Sophie apply for this role. And as soon as I saw her self tape, I knew that she was the perfect fit. I think some people are able to just be in a character. They're not necessarily actively performing. And I think just as a personal taste thing, I don't love when you feel like you can you can see the actor in the character, like when I'm watching a film, I want to feel like I'm with just a person, not an actor, unless the character is an actor, of course, but that's another story. And Sophie just has this like very authentic, uninhibited sensibility to her approach to acting. And I thought that that was the perfect fit. So that's how we found Sophie. And in terms of rehearsal, oh, did you also ask how we found Tony? I don't remember.
I didn't, but I'm curious about that too.
Oh, okay, yeah. So Tony, who played the surfer character in the film, is a friend of mine. And he's actually a director and he went to Chapman. He's not primarily an actor. So it was really interesting to yeah, so essentially I had to approach rehearsal with two different plans of attack. One for, an actor with acting experience and one for I guess you could say a quote non-actor. And we had one in-person rehearsal and probably 3 Zoom rehearsals. We were in pre-production for this film in early 2021. So this was just when people were starting to get vaccinated. So an in-person rehearsal was very it was a big deal. It took some logistics in terms of getting it to happen. Like we all had to get tested. It was an event. And for many of us, it was like our first time coming together in person with that many people in like a year. So, yeah, the rehearsing, I think for me at that time was mostly about focusing on getting to know the characters and their relationship and just being together in person. Because there's honestly only so much you can accomplish, I think, over Zoom in terms of working a scene. If you can't like be in the same space as your scene partner, then like I feel like you're losing a lot of the energy and the chemistry and the tension that needs to come across on screen. So yeah, that's what our rehearsal plan looked like.
I agree about the Zoom rehearsal because I was making a movie around the same time, and I literally just drove up to LA like an hour every time we had to rehearse like 10 times, like 10 sessions, just because I wanted that in-person thing. Because also like for me, the script evolves a lot because I do a lot of improv with actors, like on set and in rehearsals. So I always incorporate that. But I want to ask you about your collaboration with Bruno because he
Mm.
you showed me this movie when I was looking for cinematographers for a movie I was working on, and I loved the cinematography so much that I chose him to do the project. So, what was your collaboration like with him, and what was it like filming at a beach? Because filming at a beach is pretty hard.
So yeah, Bruno Solis was my cinematographer on San Clemente Syndrome, and he's a very gifted camera operator and DP. I was very lucky. I posted on like the Chapman Dodge Facebook group that I was looking for a cinematographer because I transferred to Chapman shortly before the pandemic and didn't really have as many opportunities to really connect with people before lockdown. And he responded to the post, and it just, you know, it was charmed. Like I feel like we have a lot of shared interests and similar sensibilities in terms of like our aesthetic preferences and favorite films. Yeah, Bruno's work makes me think a lot of this movement in art history called German Romanticism, which is very like very grounded in nature, like a very like subtle, like earthy, cool like tones in terms of palette and a lot of like solitary figures that are backlit. Just I mean, I'm not super educated on like the philosophical tenets of German Romanticism, but I'm just very like moved by the imagery that I've seen in some of those paintings. And a big reference for us was Manhunter was one. What else were which is a Michael Mann film.
Hmm.
Uh there's particularly one scene that was a big reference, or two scenes that were big references for us. One where two characters are in a bedroom and the tones are very blue, and it's also set by the ocean. And then another scene where two characters are, sitting on a balcony facing the ocean. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I think there was just a flow. Like he and I shot listed, and then like we met in person to kind of like act out some of the blocking so that we were very clear that we were on the same page, because we had a very limited amount of time to shoot the film, and we wanted to make sure that there were no misunderstandings that would cause us to lose time on the day. And then in terms of shooting on the beach, yes, shooting on the beach is a lot, especially when you're a small operation and can't like shut down the entire beach. We basically just had to accept that there were going to be bogeys. There were going to be people that were going to walk into the shot sometimes. But I kind of also loved that chaos, and like it, I think, allowed the film to feel even more real and authentic. And yes, there was one moment where like there was a local who refused to, leave the shot and just kept looking at the camera. So that was not ideal, but eventually we were able to talk to him and, talk him down, and he left us alone. But yeah, I mean, it was just like a fun challenge. I think the most difficult part about it was how like loud it was. Like
Hmm.
I didn't have a comtech, so I couldn't hear what the actors were saying. So I just tried to stay as close to them as possible without walking into the shot. But yeah, I'm really glad that I had that experience. I learned a lot.
What were some of your big influences on this movie and on all of your movies in general?
Yeah, so some of my uh biggest influences and favorite films include Alfonso Cuarón, the Mexican director, who's probably most famous for Gravity and Roma, and Children of Men. I think my favorite films of his are Y tu mamá también and Children of Men. I'm fascinated by his use of what is referred to as the wandering camera, where we're with our protagonists most of the time, but there are moments where the camera will walk off and just observe, you know, seemingly, background characters or extras. But I think it entails this like fascinating, commentary on what life is, and that like we think that we are the protagonist of our own movie, of our own lives. But there are other people in this world, there are other experiences happening at the same time that are worth noting, and that impact our experience. So that's something that is very inspiring to me and influential as well. I'm also, you mentioned Linklater. I love Linklater. Before Sunrise is a huge influence for me. I think you can literally see that influence in the first scene of San Clemente Syndrome, where they're passing the joint back and forth. Our reference for that was the record store scene in Before Sunrise, where they're kind of like wanting to look at each other but not. I love that scene. I think I think one of the reasons why I love that film is that even though it is very dialogue heavy, there are so many moments throughout that are very subtle, and so much is communicated without saying anything, just in a look. And I love that. I think a lot of communication happens without speaking. Um, Another influence for me is Wim Wenders' film Paris, Texas. That film is, I think it's from 1984, and uh, It's definitely on the slower side. It's the kind of film that allows you to really indulge in moments and imagery and, really sit with the characters. I mean, there is drama and there are stakes, but I think it kind of prompts the viewer to, as I was saying earlier, in terms of like my ambitions as a filmmaker, to engage with the film and reflect on themselves. And then lastly, another influence of mine is Claire Denis, who incidentally was actually the first assistant director on Paris, Texas. Yeah, so she was kind of a mentee of Wim Wenders, and she's a French filmmaker, perhaps most known for her film Beau Travail, which is one of my favorites. And she's also a part of this kind of this movement that of like quote of minimalist, slow, quiet cinema that is very inspiring to me. So yeah, I think those are the key influences.
Well, that brings us to your latest film, which is My Face Is Not My Own. Can you tell everyone what it's about?
Yes. So my senior thesis film at Chapman, titled My Face Is Not My Own, is based on my personal experiences growing up visiting my grandmother, who I looked very similar to, was very close with, as a child. And when I hit like my early teens, my grandmother started to develop more advanced Alzheimer's, and this film came out of my own reflections on my experiences, um, kind of realizing as a young teen that as I was growing up and becoming a young woman, my grandmother was regressing and almost becoming younger than I was due to her Alzheimer's. And it was a particularly kind of haunting experience because it felt like I was looking at this older version of myself become younger than me emotionally and psychologically. So, yeah, My Face Is Not My Own is a 15-minute short film, and it's coming of age, kind of slice of life type film.
Did you know early on in your time at Chapman that this was eventually going to be the story that you told with your thesis film, or did you decide that later?
Yeah, when I came to Chapman, I actually had no idea what I wanted to do for any of my films. Um, I mean, there are themes that I think that I'm drawn to that I keep coming back to, but I actually had the idea for My Face Is Not My Own during the lockdown in 2020 when I think it was prompted by a few different things. One, I was getting pretty interested in my family history, and I was, looking through our I think it was our ancestry.com family tree that a uncle of mine had built out, and it goes pretty far back actually. It was like we have pictures of my great great grandparents or great 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 grandparents, Gittel and Shlomo Offenberger. Anyway, so I was thinking a lot about family history and how much we inherit from the people that came before us, and how much is out of our control about who we are. And I was also reading Toni Morrison's Beloved at the same time, and I just felt so immersed in that exploration of intergenerational trauma. And the more I reflected on that, the more I started thinking about my own childhood and some of the things that I've experienced. And that's where this story for My Face Is Not My Own came about.
Yeah, I think it's really cool that you decided to tell such a personal story for your thesis. You know, it's not easy to do that, and I think that you did it very well. What was it like working with the younger actress in the movie as your protagonist? Because I'm sure that it's different directing someone a lot younger than you than it is directing an adult.
So yeah, so the protagonist of my thesis film, My Face Is Not My Own, was played by this very talented young actress named Halston Van Atta. And Halston, at the time of casting, was 13 years old. And so, yes, it was definitely a new experience for me to work with a minor as my protagonist. And I was really, I was nervous, to be honest. Like, I would think what was most daunting about this film for me as a director was working with so many different actors of different generations and experience level. I had one actress who played a grandmother character, one actress who's playing a mother character, another actress playing this 13-year-old girl. And they all came with very specific skill sets and experience levels and approaches to acting. And I really sought counsel from all of my professors and mentors for advice on how to approach that. And I drafted a pretty thorough plan. And then the night before shooting, day one, like I tried to not think about the plan. I tried to just keep it like in me, like muscle memory.
Lastly, my final question is, what do you hope that people will take from the experience of watching My Face Is Not My Own when they see it?
I don't necessarily have a super specific message that I want people to, take home with them. I think I mostly hope that people will engage with the film in a vulnerable way and allow it to prompt them to reflect on their own experience with their families and possibly intergenerational trauma. I think the title of the film has a lot of meaning for me because, as I was saying earlier, I think there's a lot that we inherit from the people that came before us that is completely beyond our control. We think that this is our life and I'm deciding everything about it and I'm in charge of my life. But, our likes and dislikes and our, tendencies, our habits are often, modeled for us by our parents and our grandparents, etc. And even like down to like genetics, like we like our literal like taste buds and everything. Like there's so much that we're not in control of. And I titled it "My Face Is Not My Own" as this kind of affirmation. And I love that when anyone says the title, it almost demands that they say this affirmation for themselves. My face is not my own. Nothing really belongs to us, like this is all temporary and this is all depending on how you relate to it, this is all a gift. This body is something that we're only going to have for a limited finite amount of time. And I hope that people will, you know, use that as like an opportunity to let go a little bit more and just be in the present. And I think a really big thing for me with this film was letting go of the film itself and not identifying with it so much as like this kind of indication of my own worth as a person. Just as my face is not my own, my film is not my own. It's this, offering that I've had the pleasure of creating and or taking part in the creation of and putting out into the world. And I just hope that people see the beauty in the impermanence that I'm trying to highlight. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean it's a positive thing. It's like my face is not my own, but it was given to me by people who I really love, my grandparents, parents, etc. So it's it sounds like it would be a sad thing, but it's not. It's actually a very beautiful, positive thing. Um, but anyway, I want to thank you for sitting down with me and doing this interview. I really enjoyed it, and please tell everyone where they can find you on all the socials.
Yeah, thank you so much. My Instagram is Claire off underscore. It's CLAIREOFF underscore. That's my main social media that I use, and I'm working on a website, so that'll be out eventually. And yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course, I will be putting links to both of your film's Instagram pages in the description in case anyone wants to check them out. But I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode of the Cinema Flow podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to leave us a review and subscribe. We'll be back next week with more fun movie chats. But until then, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.